In 2008, the world spiraled into one of the deepest financial crises in modern history. But was the crisis truly solved, or did we merely postpone an even greater catastrophe? As markets crashed and financial giants teetered on the brink of collapse, governments acted with unprecedented bailouts and stimulus packages. Yet, despite these drastic measures, a pervasive sense of unease lingers. Cracks are appearing in the fabric of our financial world. Let's delve into the chronological events that led to this financial upheaval. The roots of the 2008 financial crisis trace back to the early 2000s. In this era, the American dream was alive and well, and it was wrapped up in the promise of home ownership. The housing market was booming, and everyone wanted a piece of the pie. But beneath the veneer of prosperity, troubling practices were taking root. Banks and other lending institutions started granting what were known as subprime mortgages. These were loans given to individuals who were frankly unlikely to be able to repay them. Why would lenders do this? Well, in a word, greed. The more loans they gave out, the more money they made in the short term. But there was more. These risky loans weren't just kept on the lender's books. They were bundled together into what were called mortgage-backed securities, or MBS for short. These were then sold off to investors around the world. The idea was that by spreading the risk around, it would be minimized, but what it really did was create a house of cards. If even a few of these loans defaulted, it could topple the entire structure. And yet, these practices continued. Lenders kept lending, investors kept investing. The housing bubble grew larger and larger. It seemed like everyone was making money, but something was amiss. Underneath it all, the foundation was shaky. As these risky financial practices spread, a ticking time bomb was being set. In 2007, the ticking time bomb began to detonate. The housing bubble, which had been growing for years, finally burst. This was no ordinary bubble. It was a colossal wave that swept across the globe, leaving no economy untouched. The bubble was built on the backs of risky loans, lending practices that were less than savory, and an unshakable belief in the invincibility of the housing market. When it burst, it took down not just houses but entire economies. The reverberations of this event shook the very foundations of global finance. Major financial institutions, once considered the pillars of economic stability, started to crumble. Lehman Brothers, a titan in the world of investment banking, filed for bankruptcy. This was the largest bankruptcy filing in US history, and it sent shockwaves through the global markets. Bear Stearns, another major player, narrowly escaped the same fate. It was bought by JP Morgan Chase at a fraction of its former value, a move that signaled the dire state of the financial sector. These were not isolated incidents, they were symptoms of a much larger problem. The collapse of these institutions was indicative of a systemic failure, a failure that was quickly spreading across the globe. Countries around the world watched as their markets started to crash. Stock prices plummeted, wiping out years of growth in a matter of months. The global economy was on the brink of collapse, and it seemed as though nothing could stop the free fall. In the midst of this chaos, banks stopped lending to each other. Trust, the lifeblood of any financial system, had evaporated. The gears of the global economy ground to a halt. In response to this unprecedented crisis, governments around the world took drastic measures. They had to act, and fast. The world was watching, waiting to see if they could stem the tide of the crisis and prevent a total collapse of the financial system. The stakes had never been higher. Faced with the potential collapse of the global financial system, governments took swift action. As the crisis intensified, an array of measures were deployed to stabilize the financial markets. Let's focus on two of the most significant: the U.S. Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP, and the Federal Reserve's policy known as quantitative easing. The U.S. government, under the TARP, purchased toxic assets and equity from financial institutions. This was done with the intention of strengthening the financial sector. The thought process was simple but not without risk. By buying these troubled assets, the government was essentially providing a safety net, allowing these institutions to remain operational and, in turn, keep the economy from spiraling further. Simultaneously, the Federal Reserve implemented a policy called quantitative easing. This involved the Fed buying government bonds and other securities to increase the money supply and encourage lending and investment. In essence, it was like injecting the economy with a shot of adrenaline, trying to stimulate growth and curb the downward economic trajectory. These measures were drastic and they were necessary. but they were not without controversy. Critics argued that these actions rewarded financial institutions for their reckless behavior, creating a moral hazard. They suggested that by bailing out these institutions, the government was essentially signaling that these companies could engage in risky behavior without facing the full consequences. And then there was the question of debt. These massive bailouts and stimulus packages weren't free. They increased government debt, leaving future generations to shoulder the burden. This led to concerns about the long-term sustainability of such measures. In hindsight, it's clear that these actions played a crucial role in preventing a complete meltdown of the financial system. The world economy, while shaken, was kept afloat, but it's equally clear that these measures were not a panacea. They didn't address the underlying issues that led to the crisis in the first place. Although these measures staved off a total collapse, they left lingering questions and concerns. As we move forward, we must grapple with these issues, seeking solutions that ensure the stability and fairness of our financial systems. In the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis, the world was left to ponder some unsettling questions. The crisis's echoes are far from silent, even 15 years later. Its impacts continue to reverberate through our economies and societies, with some effects more visible than others. One such effect is the burgeoning government debt. Governments worldwide responded to the crisis by pumping money into their economies, hoping to stimulate growth and stave off further disaster. But this came at a cost. The money used for bailout packages and stimulus measures was borrowed, swelling the national debt to levels never seen before. And then there's the wealth gap, a chasm that seems to be ever widening. The financial crisis hit the poorest the hardest, while the wealthiest were able to weather the storm largely unscathed. The wealth gap has since grown, with the rich getting richer and the poor struggling to catch up. It's a stark reminder of the uneven impact of economic upheavals, yet perhaps the most disturbing legacy of the crisis is the potential for a repeat performance. Have we truly addressed the root causes of the crisis, or have we merely kicked the can down the road, postponing the inevitable? Some experts worry that the measures taken in 2008 were more of a band-aid than a cure, merely treating the symptoms rather than the disease. The fear is that we've set ourselves up for a future crisis, potentially even more devastating than the last. These questions linger, underscoring the importance of understanding the past to navigate the future. We're left to grapple with the unsettling possibility that the crisis of 2008 may have been a warning, a harbinger of what could come if we fail to address the systemic issues at hand. As we move forward, it is crucial to remember the lessons of 2008 and to remain vigilant in the face of potential new crises.